Hello, good morning, and welcome to this week's edition of Blabbit. Blabbit's where we bring experts in to pick their brain and learn about certain topics and certain specialties they have. Blabbit is brought to you by Open Doors. Open Doors is the only solution you need to improve your communications through internal podcasting. Hi, everyone. My name is Glenn Ingram. If you haven't been here before, I've worked for the last 2 decades improving, coaching, teaching, and working with salespeople so that they can have better communication skills, better listening skills, so they can have better influence skills. Good morning, Paul. How are you?
I'm doing pretty well, Glenn. It's good to see you. I'm very excited about
Friday.
Yay, Friday. We all made it. Hello, everyone. My name is Paul Geiger. If I haven't met you before, I will at some point. And I am a public speaking coach, presentation expert out of New York City. I help individuals, I help organizations be very clear about their messaging, and then be even better at delivering that message, taking away any of those blocking, sabotaging things that people do to make sure that they come across with the kind of commitment and authenticity that they truly do possess. Hello, David. It's great to see you.
Hi, Paul. How are you? Hi, Glenn. Good to see both of you.
Great. Tell everybody a little bit about what it is that you do.
Okay. Well, I am an attorney. I am with the law firm of Norris McLaughlin in Bridgewater, New York, and Allentown, PA. And I am the co-chair of the Executive Comp and Employee Benefits Group. My practice focuses a lot on employment issues. I represent individuals and companies in their employment matters. I move people. I focus on transitions in employment. And I have a fairly wide-ranging practice.
Excellent. Well, thanks for joining us, David.
Sure.
I want to jump into some questions that I have maybe a little bit are closer to my heart with regards to non-competes and non-solicitations. A couple of questions I would have is, first of all, how much notice does a company need to give you if they're going to ask you to sign non-compete, non-disclosure, stuff like that? As far as, when they make you an offer, after you start, when do you really have to know about that? And then if you're leaving a company, what's your best course of, departure, breaking up? How do you break up the best when you have signed one of those and you're moving on to another company?
Okay, let's start with there are 2 aspects to this. So there is the early stage and the late stage. So a company, if they have their employment documents in order, will present you at the time of the offer with a non-compete, non-solicit, whatever the restrictions are. Usually they're tied into confidentiality, work made for hire agreements. So that is at that moment, that's the time to negotiate those, to look to see whether or not if you're going to leave at some point, what restrictions will be imposed upon you. So sometimes you can look to water those down, you can negotiate them, you can have some carve outs based on what you are bringing to the table. Companies can ask for that and make that a condition of employment because they're looking to protect their assets, the company, the interests, and they don't want those interests to be diluted by a departure of any employee. And the interesting thing about non-competes is that, for example, they're not enforceable in California, but yet they are enforceable to different degrees. There is a wide range of disparity among the 50 states. So you can have different levels of enforceability. And depending upon where you are, you have to look at the laws of those states.
Is there a prescribed amount of time that a non-compete is in existence? Is there an acceptable standard for that?
It depends upon the industry, Paul. It's one that they range anywhere from 3 months to 2 years. Anything beyond that, probably not enforceable, or that becomes a little bit more difficult to enforce, depending upon the interests. I mean, many times, let's say in the connection with the sale of a business, those are much more likely to be enforced because they're tied to the consideration of the acquisition payment being made. But in terms of timing, there's a wide range, and many times those ranges can be negotiated downward. So if you're presented with a 2-year non-compete, in fact, I'm doing that now, where the client, who's an individual moving from one company to another, has been presented with a 2-year non-compete, and that's also tied into the equity documents that the client has been presented with. So we're looking to reduce that. If we can't reduce that because of the period, then we'll look to carve out certain aspects of the work that this person does to see if we can tailor it so that the exit is not as restricted.
Now, we are talking about the exit right now, but what you're talking about is setting it in place as someone takes on this employment. So what you really do is make sure that things are in order so that there isn't a real dramatic moment at the end of the employment where or there's a nebulous gray area where suddenly you get surprised.
Right. So this is, I mean, the employment agreement, the offer documents, all of the different restrictive covenant agreements that are presented to a candidate, an employee at the outset, those are, in essence, prenup documents, prenuptials, right? Those are the before we get married documents. And they govern should govern what happens if you get divorced or you leave. So that's really why those are important. They're not as important while you're there because you're not going to compete. I mean, most of them say during the period of employment and for 2 years thereafter for any reason. So that's, you want to negotiate that at the outset. You may never leave, right? You may be a lifer. But if you ever want to leave, you need to give yourself the flexibility. That's why those are negotiated. And it's a plan for the what if and when. So then to go to Glenn's question about what do you do if you're leaving, or you're contemplating it, that really runs to my practice of advising people to have their employment bag ready, their go-to bag prepared, and that is to have all your documents marshaled, put in a safe place for safekeeping. Should you be contemplating or should a departure, or should the company terminate you, or you get sense that you're in a weaker position than you thought. So you always want to have those together in what I call the employment bag. Okay, so then you need to take a look or be counseled as to what you can and cannot do, and where you can go, and what the potential violation could be, and how best to insulate yourself from the challenge should you leave and depart. I mean, I can tell you a couple of crazy things. I mean, those are non-competes and non-solicits. I can tell you a couple of crazy stories, some that I've read, some that I've actually experienced in my practice.
Yeah,
where
we love crazy stories. Please, Blabbit is all about crazy stories.
So I did represent a group of execs who left their company, but before leaving, they worked out of a satellite office, so they pretty much controlled that office, and they backed up a U-Haul essentially and loaded it with all of the files and company property, and then brought that to the new employer, to the new office. That's a major no-no, and they were ultimately sued. And so the issue, we had to defend that for them, and it was something that was not necessarily disclosed to the new employer. So there's a practice. So that's one. So that's what's an example of a no-no. That is where you run into the wood. What is it? The wood chipper or whatever it is. The machine that grinds you up. That's a problem. Then there's one that I read about. There were two that I read about fairly recently where this was in the financial services sector. The employees who were contemplating a departure actually had already probably booked their deal with the new company, have a dinner under the banner of the current employer, not the new employer. And they announce at the dinner, which is at a hotel or a big restaurant, to all their clients who they invited, or many of them, or prospects, we're leaving tomorrow and we're going to company B. And we want you all to know that we will be providing the same, if not better, services at company B. Okay. That made it into the industry newspapers, okay, or the online papers. So anyway, and that's a major no-no. Then here's a new one. This is very much in line with current technology. This pair who were a team were leaving. They produced a video where they talked about what they do, where they are, and where they're going before they ever resigned. So they were pitching clients online to come with them before ever resigning from the current employer. That's a violation of a non-solicit. That's a great example of a violation. These last two, the dinner and the video, classic example. Not really classic. They're rather new. They're innovative. They're crazy. Those are two examples of no-nos when it comes to non-solicits.
Yes, where technology of the current time really can bite you in the backside.
Yeah, I mean, to think that would not be viewed, and that that would not, be brought to the attention of the current employer. So they wound up in court or arbitration. They were pursued to stop them, and that's the problem. That is an example of what happens if you step. You step on your own 2 feet in a way. You wind up hurting yourself by violating these or taking action. You need to get counsel as to what you can and cannot do. There are do's and don'ts of what not to do, and they're specific to every non-solicit, non-compete provision, because they all have their metes and bounds. And so what you need to do is to have that evaluated and told what you can and cannot do by someone who has experience in that area. But one thing you definitely don't want to do is weaken your position on the departure and your joining of the new company by violating those. That's just suicidal.
Now, it's interesting. I know we've spoken before, David, and I think what makes what you do really unique is the fact that you don't exclusively represent employees, nor do you exclusively represent the companies that they work for. You actually, not at the same time, obviously,
Right.
but you have worked on both sides of that fence. So just tell us a little bit about what that experience allows you to do.
Sure. Well, the fact that I am able, that I represent both individuals and companies. I mean, I put companies into a position where we prepare all their HR portfolio documents. We counsel them on employment, every phase of employment, hiring, maintaining, disciplining, rewarding, bonusing, all of the phases of employment for, in the HR space. And I also, at the same time, for individuals, not in conflict with those companies, but I represent individuals in their contract negotiations, in their transitions in employment, regarding their concerns about their positions and whatnot. And what that I've always felt that gives me a very broad and wide range perspective, that I understand the needs of the company, because I'm representing many companies and servicing those needs and guiding them through to best protect them. At the same time, I'm representing individuals, so I know those needs. You really have to get in and understand, and I think that helps me provide a better service, in that I understand the goals, I understand the pros and the cons, the risks, the rewards, why something is done, and I can talk the talk. So I can talk the talk with the company counsel, because many times I'm the one that the company counsel may reach out to provide backup, or if there's no counsel, where I'm representing that entity. So I'm very familiar and comfortable with the entrance and exits and the in-between as it relates to both sides of the table. So that's where that I find that provides me with a unique background and insight into the process and how best to represent either side of the table.
Now, do you have any experience working with companies that work or have employees across multiple states? Now, the reason I'm asking this is, again, when I was part of a divorce, divorces for businesses or personal don't happen in church, as the movie said. So when you start looking at this, sometimes you're looking at suits, countersuits, and whatnot. So when companies have employees across different states, how often are there loopholes or are there things that they don't follow state law by state law? For example, I worked for a company that had a use it or lose it vacation policy that some states they're illegal, some states they're legal. So how important is it for companies with employees across state lines to evaluate these things and put that into their HR or their company policies based upon where their employees live and work?
That's a very good question, and that's something that we address. What companies need to do if you're operating in a particular state, and if you're operating in 3 states, 4 states, 5 states, as my firm does, we operate in 3 states. You need to comply with the laws of the jurisdiction. So many times handbooks will be prepared where there are supplements, state supplements that are particularized to that particular jurisdiction, or there are statements in handbooks that just say, to the extent we need to the extent that the local laws will apply, we will abide by those or follow those, or you'll be required to abide by them. So yes, one size does not fit all in terms of the policies and procedures that might work in New York, but they may not work in Nebraska, or they may not even be in existence in either state. So you need to particularize that to the particular jurisdiction. Now, many times you can have choice of law provisions in agreements that say this law will govern the contract. That's okay, but the court has to then, if it's a court, it has to be enforced under that law. And analyzed under that law. But then you get into that's just another area of the choice of law and that conflicts of law. And there are full courses in law school on conflicts of law. So that's an entire body of law. But contracts many times will have a choice of law provision or governing law provision, which says what laws will govern this relationship. But that doesn't necessarily that's in the contract space. But to answer your question, Glenn, the companies should be mindful and attend to the local laws. I mean, you could have no smoking in one and smoking in another. You could have family leave in one versus another. Then you also have the federal overlay. So you have to comply with both federal, state, and even local laws. New York City, for example, has different laws that may be more restrictive or less restrictive, depending on what the area is. But New York City has different laws than if you're operating in Syracuse, right? In Syracuse, New York. So there's statewide, there's local, citywide, and then you have to go beyond that to the federal.
You mentioned contracts. I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Glenn.
You mentioned contracts and agreements. It seems that I've seen a larger push over the last few years for arbitration clauses to maybe help mitigate some litigation. What's your experience with arbitration clauses and your opinions on having those as part of an agreement? Again, should there be problems arise in a contractual manner?
Well, arbitration is good because arbitration is not necessarily published as it is. It can be more of a private type of dispute resolution mechanism, whereas a court, it's filed, it's public, and it can drag on longer. So there's potentially a more expedited process for dispute resolution. However, so in terms of my opinion on it, I don't necessarily have an opinion on the arbitration clauses. I think that to the extent that the company wants to accomplish certain things and minimize and reduce the potential expenditure and the length, that's very good. The individuals, the individuals may or may not have as easy a time in that process. Many times these arbitration panels are made up of industry people have experience in the particular industry, or it may be retired. Many times arbitrators are other attorneys retired judges. It varies, and sometimes you can get excellent triers of fact on those panels or as a single arbitrator. There's been a tremendous amount of analysis of the pros and cons. There's all kinds of rulings that have come out on the arbitration, and that is ongoing. One of the things that typically in a contract that I like to see is, especially if I'm representing a company, is that I want to see the ability to go into court when there's and seek, let's say, a temporary restraining order on someone that's or someone's who are violating the restrictive covenants. So, for instance, the people who backed up the truck, they were hit with that type of accelerated remedy, and there was a temporary restraining order that was sought against them, and that is outside of arbitration. If there was an arbitration provision, ultimately, when there was a resolution of the merits of the matter, it might flip into arbitration. But on that more accelerated, urgent basis, you'd want to be able to get into court.
Mm-hmm. Now, how often do these documents need to be updated, either based on changes in the law, or, I mean, it's not necessarily a one and done. I mean, we talk about being prepared and having everything, your ducks in a row, but you may not touch those documents for a while, or is there a chance that things will adjust at any point and have to be amended?
That's a good question. I think for there are companies that are on top of it, that are aware of and have their HR portfolio documents, agreements, policies, procedures updated on a regular basis. They're on some retainer arrangement. They have ongoing relationships with counsel. Counsel should be updating as we do. We update on developments. We put out client alerts. We suggest, hey, you ought to adopt this. And it's an ongoing, it's an ongoing procedure that companies should go through. And then on the flip side, individuals will get these new updated agreements, and they have to, before they sign them or click, I agree, they should have those reviewed so they understand that to the extent that those covenants or restrictions were imposed at the outset of the relationship, it may change down the road as these are updated by the company. So on those, they should have counsel as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, those individuals should have counsel.
Let's take a look at that from the employee aspect. So say this has happened, meaning you're working for a large company, your supervisor's bringing this to you saying you must sign off on this, maybe compensation changes and things like this. Do you really have, as an employee of a large company, any negotiating ability there, or is it pretty much take it or leave it?
Not always. And many times it is take it or leave it, because you are being given, many times these things are issued. You talked about timing earlier. Many times, and what we recommend quite often is, the timing of it, that there should be consideration at the point in time when you're asked for a new restriction. So it depends upon where you sit, what your agreements are that govern the beginning of the relationship, and whether or not you have the leverage not to necessarily sign a more egregious or more restrictive covenant. But overall, if there's a change in law, then you really will not have much of a choice. So one thing that I do want to say is that just as a gloss for this, our conversation here, is that we're having a conversation, and I'm not delivering any legal advice or counsel, and I'm just giving you my thoughts and my ideas on this, and not providing legal advice. So I just wanted to make sure we establish that for our listeners.
Thank you. We should have asked that at the beginning, Paul.
It's okay. It applies retroactively and going forward here. So
you know what, Glenn, in all honesty, I don't expect anybody is going to hold us to anything that we say here on Blabbit. So, but no, I understand. And that is good advice, David, and taken to heart. Yes. No. Now,
don't worry, I'll defend you, but I just want to, I just want to make sure that, what's coming out of my mouth is not so.
Okay. Now, we've had conversations in the past about how important it is to be prepared. And I know I've shared with you that I love being prepared to be spontaneous. Right, Glenn? You've heard those words come out. So I'm big on the preparation. But a couple of weeks ago, we were having a conversation, David, about this, and you told me about an experience you had early on in your career that I think it really shines a light on preparation. Would you share that with everyone?
Sure. Well, I actually, Paul, have two, but I'll pick one, and that is what I would call the Thurston Howell III story, which is where I was an associate at a large law firm, and I was handling all the contracts for a foundation's a big event, and it was had to do with a regatta, and it was down at the South Street Seaport, and it was a whole big to do, and there was this foundation, and I was the corporate associate put on that. So I was invited, and I handled all the contracts, and I was invited to attend an outing, and I was given this very formal, it came in the mail, it was this very nice engraved invitation to an outing on a boat, and it was going to be on a sailboat. And I talked to the partner who I was working for, and he's, oh, it's a big deal, and it's a very, it's, oh, you got to, dress a certain way, and you got to really be prepared, and you can bring someone, and you can go also, why don't you take the junior associate who's working with you? So I asked her if she wanted to join, and she did, and we talked about what we were going to wear. Okay, so now here comes the day. We're going to this outing, and I asked my fiance at the time, she's going to join me. Now my wife, she's going to join me. And we talked about getting dressed up, because I figured we're going on a yacht. Okay. I figured here we go. We're going out on a yacht. It's going to be all these dignitaries. It could be, this was run by the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. I figured there might be some politicians there. It was going to be a big deal. And so I get myself ready. I'm in a jacket and tie. I'm wearing a blaze. I'm wearing a suit, and I got wrong side, pocket square. Okay, I got the pocket square. So I'm all set. My fiance buys a new dress. She's all set. The associate also. We then go to the pier, and I'm looking for this massive yacht, and I'm not seeing it. And so I keep asking people, where's the boat for, and I don't want to mention the name, but where's the boat for the blank foundation? And they point, and they send me over to this, like the end of a pier. There's this tiny little sailboat that we're supposed to get on. There are 5 other people. They're all dressed in, attire to sun themselves on the deck. And we're handed these cardboard carrying cases with a ham sandwich inside, and that's our thing. And there was no place for the women to sit in their really comfortably in their dresses. So with the moral or the message for that is that it doesn't hurt to be prepared. Should we have been on the big yacht and we would have been appropriately dressed, it would have been the right thing to do. But this was being over prepared, and it came back. And of course, my wife now still reminds me of that event and the fact that I asked her to get all dressed up, and she thought this was going to be a big deal, and it turned out not to be. So that's where you're over prepared. And that's I went there looking like Thurston Howell III from Gilligan's Island, and I wound up, I didn't need that. I could have gone in my gym shorts and a t-shirt and some sunblock. So that's,
we do appreciate the pocket square here today.
Oh, yeah, no, I'm wearing it. Yeah, I'm wearing it. I guess because I see myself, I'm hitting the wrong side, on
we're duly impressed.
Just thinking it's the other side. Okay. But one other story about being prepared, because it is very important to be prepared. And that ties in to the employment bag that I mentioned, that you always want to have your documents lined up, your HR documents. And that's both on company and individual side. If a company is looking to terminate someone, they need to have a personnel file. They need to have a basis for doing so. That's the best way to protect if there's wrongdoing or whatever it may be. I mean, there are at-will relationships, and as long as you're not discriminating against the individual, more than likely there's a basis to terminate under the at-will doctrine. However, for the individual needs to have all of that assembled and in a safe place and maintained, and maybe even know, what they really say in anticipation of that. But in turn, that's part of the preparation. It's good to be prepared. But I'm sorry.
I just have one thought. If I'm sorry for interjecting, but does all of this apply to what people refer to as the gig economy? In other words, you kind of go in for a short amount of time, but you're talking about longer range employment here. Is that correct?
Yeah, but I think it applies in all contexts. Whatever documentation you are provided with, you need to know what's in them. You need to have a sense of them. I mean, a gig economy, yes, there's the gig economy. There are consultants, there are people, but that are working on shorter term projects. Still, to the extent that there's documentation or some memorialization of what one will do for that entity and what the entity's obligations are, payment or otherwise, back to the individual, that all should be documented somehow and maintained and used as a reference. You may stick it in the drawer and hopefully not need it, but it's something that you should always maintain.
And especially intellectual property, what is produced within that span of time. Isn't there there has to be some rules and regulations for that?
Oh, sure. Well, there's the doctrine of work made for hire, which is something that has to be addressed, or you have to be aware of that. If you're creating, many times that will apply, and if you're creating something for an employer, then the employer owns it. And so, or there may be things you're doing outside that you can carve out of that work made for hire. That's part of a negotiation at the outset. A lot of gig employees or other employees, it depends, regardless of the context, go into a company with things that they do on the side. Let's say they write books, they give speeches, they conduct podcasts. That's their intellectual property that they would want carved out of that. So when they leave, that goes with them. They bring it in, they can pursue it, as long as it doesn't conflict with the business that they're working for, as long as it doesn't run counter to their interests, to the business interest. And that's a fair balance to strike.
Okay.
So my other story about being prepared was when several years ago at the same firm, I was the corporate associate representing the Points of Light Foundation, which was George H.W. Bush's pet project, and he would award 1,000 points of light, or a point of light, and that was the tagline, 1,000 points of light, and he would award a point of light to individuals who had accomplished a lot in public service. So as the corporate associate, I was invited to attend a board meeting and represent my firm there as the attorney and represent the foundation. And they were modifying their bylaws. And so I had to prepare to make a presentation to the board. And it was a lot of people on this board were very, very impressive, established dignitaries, senior people at Fortune 100 companies, presidents of colleges and universities, retired politicians, etc. So pretty impressive panel. And so there I was when I was invited, I had to go through security clearance. The meeting was in the Roosevelt room of the White House, which was very exciting to be there. I had my own name tag. That was my place. I had a place at the table, and I'm sitting, and I had prepared for 2 weeks. I memorized, they were modifying the bylaws. I memorized the provisions that were being changed. I memorized the sections that they had, and I memorized the amendments. And I did it for 2 weeks. I would practice in front of a mirror. I wanted to have it committed to memory that I would impress this great panel. Okay, so showtime. I go into the meeting, and my item comes up on the agenda, and they say, and now we have David Harmon here from his firm, and he's going to present the changes that we are making to the bylaws. So I stand up and I start, and then someone at the table goes, I move that we adopt them. And then someone else says, second, approved. I didn't get one word out. Okay. Right. And it happened so fast. It was like a train passing by. And so I had to read the room. Always important to read the room. And I just sat, I felt like I had to say, like, don't you want to hear something more about them? Can I tell you more? Whatever. I just sat down and I just let it go. And then, so I was well prepared. But what that led to was that George Romney, who was former governor of Michigan, former presidential candidate, father of Mitt Romney, he's on the board. And he's since deceased. He comes up to me after the meeting and he said, young man, he said, that was quite good. I don't know what I did. He said, that was quite good. He said, why don't you join me as I walk to the Metro? So I said, great. So we walked out of the White House. I walked down the driveway of the White House. I'm a young attorney at the time. I walked down the driveway with George Romney. We're having a conversation. And the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, I can't believe I'm like doing this, that I'm I'm having this one-on-one with him. And he said to me, where are you going? I said, wherever you're going. And I walked with him to the Metro, said goodbye. So something good, even though I was over-prepared and well-prepared, something good came out of that, even though the preparation was irrelevant to the task at hand.
Well, since we're telling stories, Paul, I'm going to have to kind of follow up on that real quick. I was actually out there, I think it was about 3 days after W was inaugurated the first time. And I'm on that Circle Drive, I think just on the north side off of Pennsylvania, just kind of standing there looking around. And I start to talk to the gentleman next to me. And, you're just having a conversation. We're standing there on the sidewalk. And next thing I know, I'm moving. And I'm thinking, why am I moving? Yeah, I'm getting pushed across by some form of legal representative because George is getting ready to leave. And we're watching him go by with, the black SUVs with the Tommy guns out the back and all these things like this. And you see these Harleys with the sidecar. And the guy next to me goes, I wonder what was in the sidecar. And I said, after having the machine gun pointed at me from the back of the SUV, I really don't want to know what's in that sidecar.
That's very funny.
Mm-hmm.
That's very funny.
Now, I want to bring up the idea. We've been talking about non-competes and restrictions that you might have. Let's go back to the headline of this episode of Blabbit, which is money on the table. Right. Can you give us some examples of, I don't know if I should hesitate to call them horror stories, but at least maybe some situations where people just left something there that was definitely theirs that they should have been prepared to take with them or could have taken with them. I understand it's all preparation, but do we overlook certain things in our speed and excitement to move on to the next big thing?
Yeah, many times. I mean, there are two. I can answer that question in two phases. One is in terms of preparing to leave. You want to do what I call a make-whole analysis. The make-whole analysis to look at all of your deferred comp, your equity, your bonus, your salary, your vacation days. That's what's on the table that you're entitled to. Some of it may not be have vested already if it's on the equity side, whatever form it may be in. But some of it may be vesting shortly after the departure date. So what you want to look at is what financial pieces, what dollars are you entitled to? And what are you leaving behind? That helps you avoid leaving money on the table and helps you in the negotiation of a deal by the new employer that you can be made whole for whatever you're leaving behind. And that requires an analysis, and that's something that we do for clients. We do that make whole. Others call it a leave behind analysis, what you're not going to leave on the table. And that ties in many times to the restrictive covenants, because a lot of times these contracts are drafted such that if you violate the non-compete or the non-solicit, you will leave behind dollars. You will not get all the dollars. That's the hook to prevent you from doing so, from violating. So that's the way to look at how best to protect yourself from leaving money behind, leaving money on the table, by having an analysis done not only of what financial pieces there are in your employment documents that you're entitled to, that you've accumulated, that you have scheduled, but also that helps you in the negotiation of the deal going forward. And I think that that's an important exercise to go through. That runs up against the desire to rush towards the finish line too quickly, and not to. It kind of runs afoul of what I like to call, if you don't ask, you don't get. So if you don't raise that and you don't point that out, that you may be losing something, you're going to lose it. And there's nothing wrong with asking for it. I've often told my sons, our sons, that if you don't ask, you don't get. That's something that we say a lot. It's how you ask that's important. It's how you present it. It's not just to ask for it. That's not enough. It's how you ask for it and the manner in which it's presented. And I'm always mindful of that when I'm negotiating. It's a matter of how you package the ask. Very, very important to do that. I have had clients who are just off to the races. Let's just get it done. They get too nervous. They don't want to lose the deal. And sometimes that insecurity that comes across in their own one-on-one discussions with company officers or the people who are recruiting them, many times that will hamper their ability to negotiate. That reduces and dilutes the leverage that you have as the candidate going into the new position. And that's where I have to manage the process and understand, which I since I've done this so many times, I understand, and I've left myself. This is not the first firm that I've been with. I've been with my firm 16 years, but I have moved. I had my own firm. I mean, I have moved from other firms, all in the same field, but I understand the psychology of it, the emotions, what goes on, what the needs are, and what the issues are and the conflicts that you can have in making that, and what makes you nervous, what really gets to you. So I'm able to bring that to the table based on my own experience, and also by seeing so many clients, a wide range of personalities that I represent, experience that.
Yeah. If there had been mistakes that have been made, maybe some verbal agreements that were made prior to you being brought in as counsel, do you have the ability to retrace on that? Do you have the ability to make that right by overriding maybe what a potential leaving employee may have said or agreed to? Is that not legal? Am I talking about
No, I mean, look,
hypothetical?
all is fair. All is fair. All is fair in negotiation. So again, it's how you ask for it, and many times you can pare down the impact of the already agreed to non-competes, restrictions, whatever. You can possibly negotiate for a more generous view of the vesting of the equity. There are certain people who leave who will continue to provide services in what I'll call a cooperation period. So there's leverage. It depends upon the needs of the company that you're able to look at what is on the table and then pursue adjustments. That's all in the art of the negotiation, of being able to understand where there is room, where you have latitude to modify. Is that what you were addressing, Paul? That you were about whether that's on the departure, that would be on the departure for something that's already in existence. That's why when you start negotiating the contracts at the beginning in anticipation of having the widest berth on departure, that's why that makes sense.
Kind of like from the old Dr. Karras course on effective negotiating. You rarely get what you deserve. You always get what you negotiate.
True. Again, if you don't ask, you don't get.
So let's talk about a little bit further when you're doing that. And I mean, in reality, most business relationships, like personal relationships, end up in divorce, very rarely with the same job our entire life. So how important is it to literally document all these things? When Paul says this to me, when I'm in a meeting in Paul's office, he does this all along the course of your employment. So when you're at this point to have a divorce, to break up, that you have this documentation in place that may give you ammunition in your negotiation.
Yeah, I mean, if we're talking about at the time of severance, correct? The time of separation?
Yes.
Yes. That's where many times I'm counseling people. when they're there, they feel there's trouble, they feel that they are at risk. What should they do? I always advise, it's always good to keep a running, like a diary, to make a contemporaneous writing of what's going on, record that. I mean, and to the extent maybe this is something's going on that it has to be reported to HR for an investigation. It depends upon there's a wide range of things that could be going on. If there are really bad acts violating policies, that many times has to be reported, depending upon whatever it may be. So that helps by doing that. That helps. Now, you don't want to necessarily, that flies in the face of having to walk around with a pad and or your laptop, and you're taking notes every time someone talks to you, or every time that may be a little cumbersome. But overall, it doesn't hurt if you start to sense that there's an issue, or if you are going to leave and you're leaving for a reason where you feel you've been aggrieved. More often than not, a client comes to me, they've been terminated, or they've been terminated, and I ask, as part of the introductory file, I always say, I need to see your blood work and your x-rays in order to do the procedure. So I ask for a chronology. I ask for a he said, she said. I ask for all of that. I ask for the story. How did we get here? And where do you think you've been aggrieved? Because I'm looking for leverage. I'm looking to see, has there been a violation of the law? Where can we find that leverage? That's always important. And many times that has occurred, and that's a fact, and that you can't ignore the fact. And that's why you don't rush into the end zone, because if you go too fast, you're going to be in the end zone without the ball in your hand. Okay, that's no touchdown. That's a fumble. Mm-hmm. And that's why you need to have an expert, someone who knows what they're doing, who understands the law and understands how to negotiate these. Someone like that has to evaluate it and guide you. Mm-hmm. One thing that I want to say also is that, which I always, this is how I always approach these engagements, is that one size does not fit all. Everyone is different. Everyone has different goals. Everyone comes to the table differently, different experience, different financial needs, different concerns. And you need to, I always do. You have to understand that individual or the business's needs, the owners of the business. Everybody's human. I mean, everybody has needs and goals and issues, and you have to be mindful of that. So that's always something that has to be considered when being engaged. That's how I operate, is that I want to understand the needs of the client, and not just, it's not like following a recipe and you have to follow it, 1 cup of this, 1 cup of that, 1 spoonful of this. No, you have to be able to adapt to the needs and the goals and ferret those out in the context of the engagement.
Mm-hmm. So if you are someone who is leaving a company for your own reasons, not for the company's reasons, you're not being let go, but you are moving on, as many people are, we're experiencing what some people call the great resignation.
Right.
Do employees feel more of a sense of, well, I'm kind of leaving them in the lurch, so I'm just going to let that go, more so than companies feeling that way if they have to let somebody go? Like, I could just see we talk about human nature. I could just see an individual being like, oh, well, you know what? I'm just happy to be moving on, so I'm just going to let that go. I'm sure you've experienced some of that as well, David.
Oh, yeah. But my job is to make that person aware of what the cost is, or what the loss is, or what the leave behind is. Mm-hmm. In the end, it's not my decision. It's my job to counsel. It's my job to advise. It's my job to point it out. It's almost like saying to someone, it's like you say to someone, hey, it's raining outside. Maybe you want to take an umbrella. But the person doesn't have to take the umbrella, right? They can go out and get soaked. That's their prerogative. That's their choice. But right. You have to, as an attorney, you have to advise that person and make them aware of what the pros and cons of any particular action might be. You have to weigh and measure, and then they decide. I mean, very often I get a separation agreement or an employment agreement, and I'll highlight issues. I can send a red line back to the client that has 25, 30 comments. Confirm this, look at that, is this what you understand the deal to be? What about reducing this and that? And then we go through it and we analyze, do you want to raise this or not? Here's the reason why you would. Here's the reason why you wouldn't. Because sometimes and many times you don't want to go back with a laundry list of 25 items. You could blow the deal, but at least you're making that person aware of what the points are, and then you can whittle it down to the most important issues. So from 25, you have 5 or 10, whatever it may be. And there are the high priorities and then the ones that are lower priority.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've talked about the language of negotiating, using the right kind of language. Is there any advice you can give to our listeners right now who maybe don't have counsel right now, but are in negotiations, have chosen not to go that route? Are there any no phrases? Are there any bad choices of words? Are there any good choices of words when you are framing the things that you want?
Well, that you're asking that question, and it reminds me of a flub of my own that I will share with you. And I think this illustrates, it answers the question by a story. So my experience was, my children were older or old enough that they didn't need the swing set anymore in our backyard. So I hired a man to come in to take the swing set out. And he's this lovely man, Peter. I won't mention his last name. Peter comes by. He has his truck, and he's going to take. And so I meet him outside, and we talk, and I point out what I need to have and what I want him to take away. And he tells me, all right, it'll cost $300. So my knee-jerk reaction, and I'm in business too, and I don't know why I did this to him, but I said, is that your best number? And so he said, no, 800 is my best number, but I'm doing it for 300. So I immediately said to him, I am going to go inside and write you a check right away. That's the best line I've ever heard. No, 800 is my best line. So I think the better way, what I should have done is I should have said, what kind of flexibility do you have? That opens it up a little bit more for ranges. And it doesn't say, is that your best number? It's easy. It's a slam dunk to say, yes, that's my best number. You're using the word best, which is like the top of the heap. Flexibility means there's a range. How much can we push it? And so that to me is the best way to ask that very same question. And who knows? Maybe I would have gotten it for $250. I don't know. But I went right in there and I paid him the $300. I would have paid him more. I just thought it was the best line.
His response was
the best line.
Was the best.
Yeah.
I know.
And I've used that, if a client comes in and says to me, is that your best number? I go, no. And I raise my hourly rate by $100 or whatever it may be. And I go, no, this is my best,
You have to appreciate that sense of humor.
Yeah.
Well, and I know, David, we have appreciated you being here on Blabbit and giving us of your time, your experience, and your insight. And, again, there are so many things that we all need to think about in business and just in life in general. And you've helped us to shine a little bit of light on an area that is of big benefit and big consequence to anyone who is starting a new job or leaving an old job. So thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to spend this hour with you and to share some of my stories and to talk about what I do. And it's been a lot of fun, and I thank you very much.
Yes, it's been a pleasure. Thank you. Should anybody be in your areas and would like to contact you, what's the best way to do so?
Should I recite my email address?
Whatever you like.
Okay. Sure. So it's David Harmon, D.T. Harmon, Harmon at Norris, Norris -law.com. The law firm is Norris McLaughlin, and I can be reached that way. or you can just look me up and find my contact info that way as well.
Awesome.
Excellent.
Well, thank you very much. This has been great. We appreciate your information. Everyone, we'll see you back at the same time, same channels next week.
Great.
Take care, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.